So just to begin, what brought you to this desire to head to France?
Well, it's been quite a few years in the running. Missions is something that we discussed before we were even married, and we've been married 6 years now. But when I was an undergrad for 1 year at CCU, there were some missionaries from Germany who visited the Seabolts, if any of you know them. You know, they talked about the needs for Western Europe, and so I knew that Brett was going to be speaking in chapel the next day after he'd visited one of my classes, and I went home and said, "You're coming to chapel tomorrow because Western Europe is our place." And she went and she heard Brett speak, and that was clear to her as well. And so we began praying for an opportunity at that time. I mean, this is over 5 years ago. You know, there's not as many opportunities to do a short-term project where you can go build a house or dig a ditch or whatever in Europe. And so we needed an opportunity where we could go and meet people doing the work there and learn what it was like. And we began praying for that. And at the National Missionary Convention a few years back, we're going around and we saw this one booth that was for European missions, and somebody was holding a sign that said, "Do you want to go on a bad trip?" And that caught our attention, and it was bad, Belgium, Austria, Deutschland. And so we went on that and came home feeling very surefire about Germany. And I even, as a result of that trip, turned in my notice to the church I was at. I was a youth minister at the time, and said, "In a year I'm leaving, and I'm going to go get my master's degree, and then we're going to be missionaries." And we've stuck to that. But the thing that changed, as you can tell, is Germany. About November 2012, I confessed to Jessica. I said, I'm not as confident about Germany anymore. And at this time, we were even studying German. We were trying to prepare ourselves. And she said, it's strange, but I've had the same feeling. And I have to tell you, I hate German. And so at that point, we started looking at different options. And it was the very next month that I actually went to Germany with Rick Cherok and a group from Cincinnati Christian. And it was a conference of Christians from Europe. And I started asking people, who do you know in France? Who's in France? Do you know anybody working in France? And the answer I kept getting was, no, we don't know anybody, no. And I came home, I started asking professors. I asked people here last year, who do you know in France? And every time we heard the word no, we don't know anybody, the more our hearts started to burn. Like, well, we need somebody there. We've got to do this. And so it was really about 18 months ago that we started leaning toward France. And I think about a year ago that we said, okay, France is where we need to go. And it doesn't hurt that she took French in high school, and it's a language she approves of. So, that's important.
Well, so in the meantime, have you come across any missionaries that are currently working in France from our denomination?
I had one contact, and her name was Karen Richardson. And when I emailed her about 18 months ago, what I heard back was, I've been in the field for 35 years, but my father just died. I'm going home to take care of my mom. And that was my one good contact that I knew of, and so she's not there anymore. And so she had, over the years, different Americans working with her, but none of them are there either. And so currently, from our brotherhood, I don't know of any that are in France. And if any of you do, please speak to us later.
So have you come to any conclusions on where in France that you actually want to go to work?
Well, the door that opened for my internship was in a region called the Dordogne, which is more rural. If you find Bordeaux on a map, it's on the Atlantic coast, about 2/3 of the way down. And the Dordogne is about an hour and a half straight east of that. And because of just the warm welcome that I got there and seeing the work that is there, that's definitely something we're trying to keep up communication with them, with the thought of going back, at least for the beginning of our time there, to work with an established church. But we know for a fact that the first year we want to devote ourselves to language training. It became very apparent to me in my time there that especially in France, if you don't know the language, you're not going to get anywhere. Having gone to say Germany, it's important to know German, but the Germans are a little more flexible in speaking English with you, and maybe would be a little more willing to go there, but the French are not. You need to know their language. You need to be able to communicate with them. So for that first year, we're hoping to start in September 2016 at a language school in a town called Albertville, which is in the southwest. If you recognize the name, it was the site for the '94 Winter Olympics. But it's a language school that's been around, I think, 30 years, and it only trains missionaries. But then after that, we're hoping to set up a relationship, with the churches that I was working with in June in the Dordogne, and to get established within that area, because I saw a lot of need and a lot of opportunity. And the churches there, even though it is a more rural area, I found are still very connected with other churches across the country. And that's something that's been really progressing in recent years in France, is all these churches realizing how much they need each other and really opening paths of communication. So even if that's not where we would be 10 years from now, it's a great place for us to start, because it would allow us to see future open doors into other parts of France.
The religions of the area, because if I'm not mistaken, it seems to be more Muslims moving into France. Is that typical of this area? What are the religions and that are there?
The influx of the Muslim population is definitely a big deal in France. It's much more so in the larger cities, but I was even told in a place like Bergerac, which for me is out in the middle of nowhere, in a city of 25,000, that they are seeing it as well. But I mean, for the most part, it's a non-religious country. I saw a statistic recently that, many people throughout the world will say, well, I'm just not religious, and leave it at that. But they won't actually claim atheism. But for the percentage of people that will actually claim to be an atheist, France is near the top of the list in that regard. And so it's less than 3% evangelical Christian, technically 40% Catholic, but the percentage of that actually means anything, that are actually attending church, would be minuscule compared to that number. Mostly it's just a heritage. My family's Catholic, so I'm Catholic, and that's what I do. But for the most part, religion of any sort is looked down on.
Then as you look at going into France, have you started to develop any plans as to what or how you would like to do it? Because I'm going to guess that you're not going to use traditional American methods for starting a church.
Right, and that is, in the end, what we want to do. I was told that for the average French person, if they want to go to a church that's not just the little Catholic church that has 5 members, they're probably on average driving an hour. And so France needs churches, and we want to plant churches, but it became very clear that that's not how we can start. We need to find a setup where we can team up with people who are already there, who are experienced, and we can learn from them, and hopefully from that build a good platform to start another church. And so that's where we want to start, is with somebody that's established there. And that's why this Dordogne region is so natural, because I can't tell you, everybody I met just very specifically said, we're praying that you come back here. And so it's just a very open door for us. But as far as methods, you run into cultural issues there, because to ask somebody about their religion or to tell them what religion they should be is very personal. The British that I was with would joke about themselves, so they say, we don't talk about religion and politics, but then we always turn around and actually do it. But the French don't. And, I was told 4 Frenchmen could sit in a room for an hour talking politics, and at the end of the conversation, you wouldn't know where any of them stood on the issue. And so they don't dive into those personal aspects of their life, especially in these rural areas. And so to broach that topic with them on any level can become difficult. Even in these safe little towns where there's no crime, people have gates around their homes. You can't go knock on their door. You have to buzz the gate. Yeah, I heard of neighbors who have lived next to each other for 35 years, and they're still Mr. and Mrs. They don't call each other by the first names. And so to venture outside of your family and create strong connections is difficult and rare. And on top of that, they're very philosophical in their thinking. They love to think about things, but to actually commit to what you're thinking about is something that doesn't happen. And so I began asking people over there, do you know any late life, or any French people who have late life conversion stories? And the only one I got was, he was actually a Frenchman who knew English, so I was able to talk to him, and he watched the Passion movie and thought, wow, I've missed the boat on this one, and he became a Christian. But obviously that's not going to be the norm. And so, to even hear stories of how people are converted was difficult for me to even find being there. So you have that cultural difficulty, but then you have legal difficulty. If we wanted to go start a Church of Christ, we would have to either make sure that first they've been registered with the government, or we would have to go through that process, and the French love bureaucracy. And so that could be a multi-year process, honestly. But if we were to try to do anything as a church before being registered, we could be labeled as starting a sect and be kicked out of the country rather quickly. And so anything you have to do has to be through your registered church. So if you're handing out a pamphlet or a leaflet or anything, you better have your church name on there so that they know you're legit and you're registered. You'd better write on that leaflet, do not throw on the ground, because if somebody throws it on the ground and you haven't instructed them not to, you could get in trouble. And so, like I said, they love their bureaucracy, they love their laws, and their laws are not exactly tailored toward encouraging churches. And so you have to be very careful with what you do and how you do it, and you have to be familiar enough with the system to do that. And if you do something like make the mayor mad in a little town, you're probably not going to be doing anything there anymore, because in these little towns, everything would run through the mayor.
When you talk about little towns, what size are you talking about?
Well, I stayed in a little town called La Chapelle-Aubade in the first week, and the town itself was probably 45, 50 people. But the commune around the town, as they would call it, which maybe would be like a county for us, was about 500. But throughout this region, that would be pretty normal. But what was really fascinating to me is that despite that, how connected the different believers from the different areas were, and how willing they were to drive, an hour and a half every other week for a prayer meeting, to make sure that they're staying connected. And so that was really encouraging to see, what can even be done within a situation like that.
So what type of ways then do you have to make contact with people? Just people you run into the market or something like that?
I came into a range of answers to that question. Some would be on this end of the spectrum, and they would say, you can't do anything except try to make personal relationship or personal contacts with people. You become friends with them, and maybe after some time you'll be able to talk to them and get them into church. And then there were other people over here that were kind of the attitude that, you know what, we are the church, we need to do our business, and even if we're flirting the law from time to time or offending people, that's just the nature of the beast. And it was interesting that it was the indigenous French and kind of lay people who had come over there just to be retired, but they want to be involved in church, were more on this end of the spectrum. But it was the missionaries that I met that were more over here. And so to get the different answers to that was interesting. But if you're in a good relationship with the mayor and you're paying attention to the laws and how you do leaflets and like that, you can do things, and you can have an open air meeting, and you can stand on the street and hand things out. And honestly, there's not a lot of stories of people being arrested or anything. It's just these laws are there to kind of, create this framework for how they want things to kind of go. But for the most part, people that were telling me, that they were maybe flirting that a little bit, they'd even be just asked to stop, and so they stop, and they come back the next day. And so there's a way to push that, and I think that's one of the things that's needed for even the French people who are already believers, is they need an outside influence. And I'm not saying this out of arrogance, I'm saying this because this is what I heard from them. They need an outside influence coming in, showing them how to do that, because it's so against their thinking to even try to do that and try to push against the state. They're very state-minded in that sense. And so the one church that invited me in Bergerac, they have an English church that is mostly people from the UK, and then they have a French church, and they have great fellowship together. But there will be times when the French church says, you know what, we've got this thing, we know it needs to be done, but we'll never do it, so you guys just do it. And so they're very open to that and feel a need for that. And so they want to be pushed, but they have difficulty doing it themselves.
But as far as to expand upon developing personal relationships, something that we've found, not even just in France, but in a few of the other Western European countries, is that they're very club-centric or hobby-centric. So what you do is if you have a hobby, say cycling, you join a cycling club, and that's a definite way to meet people. So you don't necessarily, you're not best friends with your next door neighbor, but you do have your club that you can make contacts with and kind of network that way. So it's not like we wouldn't have an opportunity to meet people. It's just doing it through their cultural kind of way. And so it's just kind of getting used to how they make friends.
Now, you guys have 2 kids, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to guess you're going to have your hands full with raising kids, but what about education as they get to that point? What's that like in France? What are you expecting to do when that time comes? I'm not sure how old your kids are now, but I'm going to guess they're not in college yet.
If our timeline stays true, Lord willing, they will be 6 and 4, and they will be going into the local school system. Even if we wanted to homeschool, it's nearly impossible to do there. Once again, the bureaucracy of France. But we're not even sure we want to do that because we want them to be comfortable. And we want them, in a sense, to be French. But it was a pleasure for me to be able to meet people. One man from who's Dutch, and then another South African, and a couple of Americans who actually came to France with children similar ages. And the thing I kept being told was, don't worry about your kids. They'll be fluent after 3 months, and after 6 months, they'll be correcting you. And so that was an encouragement to hear, because obviously it's a point of concern for us. But they will be just joining the local school. And it's another benefit to the language school for our first year, because in our communications with that language school, they've told us that because they've been there so long, the local school system is used to having foreign kids coming in. And so to have that encouragement, to know that there's a school system that would be used to, dealing with that is nice for us.
Now, are there a lot of opportunities then through the schools that the kids would get involved and you would make contact with their parents?
We're very hopeful of that, and we think that should be something that should happen somewhat naturally, but it's not something I learned a lot about in my time there. So I would assume that there are opportunities to do that, just like there would be anywhere, but that will remain to be seen.
Do we have any questions from the audience right now that anybody might want to ask?
About raising support.
Well, we are crafting that plan. I guess that opens up a prayer request for us. We are currently trying to communicate with a couple of organizations and just looking at that possibility. But we are also met with somebody last week who's familiar with forming a nonprofit. And so that's our nearest point of decision, is whether or not we feel the need to partner up with somebody or to go this. I don't like saying independent, because we already have these contacts over there who we're looking forward to working with, but independent in that sense. And so that's something we're working on right now, and we're hopeful that by mid-fall we'll really be diving into that and sending out mailings and getting people involved with that.
Have you gone through any process right now of what a budget would be, how much it would take for you to get your feet on the ground there in France?
It's easiest to look at that first year at the school, because just on their website we can see tuition fees and we can see the rental fees for homes and like that, and they give an estimate for living costs. So for that first year at the school, we're looking at least $50,000 for that year to cover those costs, and that's their numbers that we're looking at. After that, it's a little harder to say until we have something totally nailed down. I mean, I had a man in the Dordogne offer me his house, and so that would obviously make things easier if that worked out. He said he was looking to sell, but it can take 3 years, 4 years to sell a house there. So he said, well, If I sell it about then, you can just live it until it's done. So that would obviously help the budget. But, right now we're really focused on that $50,000 number for that first year to cover the school and the cost of living that they offer there. The church that actually opened themselves up to me is an English-speaking church, and it's mostly people who have either retired to France or they have gone there to do church work. But, looking at in their situation, it's interesting that for we Americans, we look at the United Kingdom and we say, oh, only 9% church, they're suffering so much, and they need missionaries too. But for the people from there going to France, they would keep talking about the UK like it was this glory land of Christianity, and how there's so many churches that we could be involved with and so many believers, and so by comparison, France felt like a drought to them. And so I had opportunities to do some Bible studies with the people there, and it was just interesting how I've never had anybody in my life eat up one of my Bible studies like they did, and to see them be so captivated by it. And I tried to tailor it to their situation in France, and they were truly inspired. And so it's not that I was teaching any differently there, but what it was is that that it truly does feel so dry, even for these people in the UK compared to them. And for me in America, I came back here thinking, wow, we could win this whole country. It's so easy here. And so from that perspective, it's just interesting how a simple Bible lesson on Stephen can become this source of hope that people a week later are like, I've been thinking about this all week. It's maybe something because of our situation we even take for granted. But there's certainly a thirst and a hunger for the word among the believers there, because they don't have it as much as maybe we do.
Well, I want to thank you for your time this morning. We're kind of drawn down, and I hope everything goes great for you.